Osio and Ostasuhiei. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Paul Matheny. Yes, I managed to stay 24 years in the Navy. They put up with me that long. I taught ROTC down at Hazel Green High School for 11 years. And my favorite part was teaching history to ROTC cadets. My journey in learning about the Trail of Tears starts in 1997 when I run into Dr. David YoungWolf at Arkansas State University when they used to be the Arkansas State Indians. Now they're the Arkansas State Red Wolves. In 1987, the Congress designated the Trail of Tears trails as National Historic Trails. In 1993, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma establishes the National Trail of Tears Association. And they have done a tremendous job in trying to tell the story of the Trail of Tears. Now, the Trail of Tears is really about Indian removal, which I'll go into a little bit. It's about Indian removal. In the dominant culture, your wealth was determined by how much land you had. Who had the land? The Indians. So they had to figure out ways to get that. And so this is about Indian removal, which starts way before the removal period. As you can see, I like this photograph because the 17 detachments of Cherokees who were sent to Indian Territory, most of them were like wagon trains. Yes, some walked, some rode in wagons. And I'll talk a little bit about the consistency of these wagon trains in a few minutes. Okay. Originally, the Cherokees referred to this as the trail where they cried. Then over a period of years, it becomes the Trail of Tears. Okay. John Wayne Indians. Okay? You and I, who saw John Wayne's Indian movies, were expecting the Indians to look like this, right? Oh, yeah. Everybody's got a headdress, an eagle headdress, even those two young boys. Okay? So if we were going to play Indian, we had to have a headdress, maybe a bow and arrow. The arrow had like a rubber stopper on the end, and that's the way we played Indians. Well, these are the Plains Indians. This is on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and you can see the ladies there dressed in beautiful buckskin outfits. You got a couple of cowboys each side, and you see the teepee in the back. The Plains Indians preferred the teepee because they followed the buffaloes and the animals across the plains. So these are the John Wayne Indians. These are not the Southeastern Indians. These are definitely not the Cherokee Indians. Okay, the water route. Now, when you're studying the Trail of Tears, the majority of the detachments of Cherokees went by land, but some went by water. Okay, they would get on their steamboats or their barges in Chattanooga. They'd come down to the Tennessee River until they got to Decatur with the shoals problems. Okay, and they put them on the TC&D Railroad. And then they go down to Tuscumbia Landing, and the steamboats and barges would come down the Tennessee River on that side, take them up the Tennessee River, over the Ohio, down the Mississippi, and up the Arkansas River. And if you were going to say someone was fortunate in this whole horrendous event, the ones who went by water would have suffered the least. They suffered enough, but they didn't have to walk 900 miles. Like some of them did. So there was a water route that some of the Cherokees and some of the Creeks actually took. Okay, now, you don't see a teepee here, do you? Okay, by the 1800s, this is the kind of home the Cherokees would be living in. Okay, they preferred the cabins. They had become very culturated, and there were things they liked. They liked the cotton clothes. They could weave cotton. They learned to do that. The buckskin was not preferable And so they began to adopt the ways of the dominant culture, and one of them was they became great businessmen and great businesswomen. And they learned how to take cotton and weave it. And they liked the cotton clothes because they could do more with it. So this would be the type of cabin that the Cherokees were in when the soldiers show up and grab them and take them out of their homes. Okay, when I'm teaching high school kids, you'll have to forgive me. I guess everybody knows who Leonardo DaVinci is. Okay? Leonardo said the knowledge of the past and places of the earth is the ornament and the food of the mind of man. That's why we teach history. That's why we teach social studies. That's why many of us are doing DNA research. We want to know where we came from, who our ancestors were. Okay? And so he figured that out a long time ago. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to tell you, some of the research I'm going to tell you came from Dr. David YoungWolf. That's pronounced Wayanita in Cherokee. Some of his cousins stayed Wayanita, and some of his family became YoungWolf, which is the translation of Wayanita. Dr. YoungWolf was a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokees, born on the Qualla boundary, Cherokee, North Carolina. Okay, his father got promoted to officer in the 82nd Airborne. So he takes David and he puts him in Valley Forge Military Academy. So he goes through Valley Forge Military Academy, and then he goes to the University of Michigan, plays some football. Unfortunately, his birthday was #1 when they had the first Vietnam-era lottery. He was #1. Okay? They let him graduate, and they wanted him to go to OCS. He said, no, I'm going to enlist like my father did. So he goes to Vietnam, comes back, uses his GI Bill to go to UCLA Law School. Comes back to Brooklyn, New York, where his father did some recruiting, and becomes a public defender. He also becomes a member of Giuliani's Task Force on Organized Crime. His entire family were carvers. This was his shop in Gatlinburg. You can see the eagle, impressive eagle he carved. He also carved in stone. Okay? And so he was a very interesting guy. We met at Arkansas State University. Later on, we realized we were cousins, so we kind of had a connection. And he would share with me the information that he was finding, and he was doing this research that he was commissioned to do. Okay? And oh, by the way, he discovered that President Bill Clinton has a Cherokee story in his family, as many of you do. Okay, now this is about the 1700 time period where I listed the American Indian tribes that were here: the Biloxis, Choctaw, Muskogee Creek, Alabama, Coushatta, Cherokee, and Chickasaw. The smaller groups get sandwiched in with these larger, more, shall we say, I don't want to use vicious, more powerful American Indian tribes. So the Biloxis and the Alabama, of course, as we know, the state of Alabama was named after the Alabama Indians. So that kind of gives you what it looked like in 1700. Okay, I'm going to go back here. There we go. Now I wanted to give you a perspective. In 1700, this is the territory claimed by the Cherokees. This is it. Okay? Parts of 8 states. You got Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. And they're spread all over these states. Each town, each Cherokee town, and this was something that took Dr. YoungWolf for time for me to get through my thick Tennessee skull. He said you have to look at these Cherokee towns as the Greek city-states. They had their own chiefs. They had a white chief for peacetime. They had a red chief for wartime. So each one of these towns had their own leaders, and they were pretty much independent. They would only get together when they were trying to decide whether they were all going to go to war against somebody, whoever that might be. Now, by the time we get to the removal of the Cherokees are being crammed into this area right here. Georgia, North Georgia, Southeastern Tennessee, and Alabama, north of the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River becomes like an interstate highway for the Cherokees. So they start moving down that Tennessee River into North Georgia. So basically the territory that they would have claimed would have been everything north of the Tennessee River as far as Alabama was concerned. So you can see a vast territory that the Cherokees claim. Okay, today, I always give a little update. Today, there are 8 state-recognized tribes, and there's 1 federally recognized tribe, the Porch Band of Creek Indians. And they have a wonderful casino, by the way. Okay, now, when you're talking about Indian removal, you got to start with the Louisiana Purchase. Now, Thomas Jefferson, on probably 4 different occasions, made it clear that they were going to buy the Louisiana Territory so they could move all the Indians from here to here. Okay? They wanted that land. So in the very beginning, when you talk about Indian removal, this is the first move that the United States made. They borrowed $15 million from a bank in England, the Borrowing Bank, to pay Napoleon for the Louisiana Territory. There's a lot of YoungWolf and his staff did some pretty incredible. I got a phone call at midnight from Dr. YoungWolf. He said, "You're not going to believe what we just discovered." They had been to the National Archives, and they were looking at the original documents, and they were beginning to see some things that made them wonder about this agreement that we made with Napoleon. And they discovered that in this agreement with Napoleon, there were large tracts of land that had been set aside for the Indians, which after the purchase, we obviously ignored. Okay? Also part of the treaty was you have to negotiate with any of these tribes in the Louisiana Territory that has a treaty with France. We didn't do that either. So, he goes to Louisiana State University in 2000. They were doing all this massive research because they wanted to do a 200th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase. And so David said, "I want to see if you're discovering what I'm discovering." And they said, "Yes, we are. And we're recommended they don't have a 200th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase because all this information of what we didn't do is going to come out." So that's the kind of original research David was doing, and he called me at 11:30 at night, so you're not going to believe what I found next. Okay, so Louisiana Purchase is involved in Indian removal. Okay, Major Ridge. Okay, if you're a Cherokee, Major Ridge is one of the important characters in agreeing to move to Indian Territory. Okay, Major Ridge is called Major Ridge because he was an officer in Andrew Jackson's Cherokee Regiment, which served him well in the War of 1812. And I'd never heard about Andrew Jackson's Cherokee Regiment until Dr. YoungWolf started asking me, "Have you read this book?" Now, if you're interested in these 600 Cherokees that helped make Jackson famous, this is the book. It's called Cherokee American Alliance in the Creek War, written by Dr. Susan M. Ambrim. She's a tenured professor at Western Carolina University. It's a good book if you're interested in these 600 Cherokees that helped make Andrew Jackson successful on the battlefield. Major Ridge went to visit Andrew Jackson in 1835. He said, "We're being tormented by the people from Georgia. The Georgia militia is killing our people. They're taking everything we have. They're throwing us in jail. Will you protect us?" And so Andrew Jackson, who's still president in 1835, said, "Major, if you want to prevent the extinction of the Cherokee people, you've got to go west." So based on that and the horrible things that was happening, Major Ridge and his faction signs the Removal Treaty, which was ratified by Congress in 1836 and basically gives the Cherokees 2 years to remove to Indian Territory. The Major Ridge is one of the bravest Indians, according to Andrew Jackson, in battle that he ever saw. That's why he was an officer in Jackson's regiment. As you can see, he's dressed in the finest businessman's clothes of the day. He was a very successful businessman. And by the way, his two-story home is now the Chieftain Museum in Rome, Georgia, which is a great place to visit. Okay, he is the person who mentions the first time band of brothers. He tells the Cherokee Indian agent, Meigs, "We will go with our older brothers, the Whites, and fight the Red Sticks as a band of brothers." So he was the first one that used that terminology that I have seen, and we're going to go as a band of brothers and do something. He's a very good officer, a very brave man. Okay, David Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. Everybody knows about David. Okay, David, political vote for the Indian Removal Act. And here's what he said. "I voted against the Indian bill, and my conscience yet tells me that I gave a good, honest vote, and one I believe will not make me ashamed in the day of judgment." So you can see he fought in the Tennessee militia under Andrew Jackson, and he fought alongside many of these Cherokees. And he could not believe that they were going to do this to these Cherokees who basically helped Jackson be successful. Okay, he's the only Southeastern congressman to vote against the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Cherokees loved him. The Chickasaws loved him. When David finally gave up the ghost and gave up his efforts in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee area, he goes to the Chickasaws and buys some of their wonderful horses and supplies, and he and his 27 Tennesseans, unfortunately, who wind up in the Alamo, they thought they were going down there to claim their 640 acres because they had signed up to fight with the Texas Army against Santa Anna. Unfortunately, they went to Alamo, and it didn't turn out very well for David. And oh, by the way, I used the movie The Alamo to teach my cadets about the Texas War of Independence and the Mexican War. And there's a whole lot of stuff in that movie that's absolutely 100% correct. Some of the conversations, these historical, especially David describing the Talousahachie battle, is absolutely perfect. I mean, it's right out of the history book. So it's a good movie that I used with my cadets. Okay, anybody ever heard of Sam Houston? Oh, yeah. He was an adopted Cherokee. His adopted Cherokee father was John Jolly, a very famous Cherokee chief. When he was a kid, he'd run away from home and hang out with the Cherokees. They taught him how to hunt, they taught him how to fish, they even gave him a Cherokee name. Okay? So Sam Houston was a person who had an affinity for the Cherokees. And it's kind of interesting, Sam was teaching school in Maryville, Tennessee, when the United States decides we're going to have to get some help for Andrew Jackson down there fighting the Red Sticks. So they formed the 39th Infantry. Okay, they formed the 39th Infantry Division. Sam, being a school teacher, becomes an officer. So this is a stylized painting of the 39th as it gets across that incredibly well-built log wall that the Creeks had built. Okay, well, I'll discuss that a little bit in a few minutes. But this shows Sam getting across the log wall, getting shot by an arrow in the thigh. He goes back across, they take the arrow out, he gets back in the battle and gets shot in the chest. And they think he's going to die, but obviously he doesn't. He got pretty good medical care. A guy from Dr. Hanna from Fayetteville, Tennessee, administered medical care, but I guess saved his life. So what Sam learned in his service with Andrew Jackson, if you watch the Alamo movie, he tells the Texas politicians, I'm in charge of everybody, or I'm in charge of nobody. Because he saw the problems Andrew Jackson had with these Tennessee militia commanders. Okay? One of the groups that became Andrew Jackson's bodyguard from time to time was Captain Russell's spies, which were basically scouts and so forth, reconnaissance guys. Almost all Cherokees, and they were his bodyguard from time to time. When he got into it with these militia commanders, and they had some serious disagreements with these militia commanders. Okay, Andrew Jackson. Okay, if you're a Cherokee, you're supposed to hate Andrew, right? Okay, if you're Southeastern Indian, you're supposed to hate it. However, I've said in the past, if you really want to hate somebody, hate the state of Georgia, because they did horrible things. Governor Lumpkin and those guys did horrible things to the Cherokees. But anyway, Andrew Jackson, after the Fort Mims massacre, they say, Major General Jackson organized the Tennessee militia and go stop the Red Sticks. They're going to come and take Huntsville, and they're going to come into Middle Tennessee. So he musters the Tennessee militia in where we're living now, in Fayetteville, at Fort Blount, and then they go south, okay, to fight the Red Sticks. He becomes, during the War of 1812, one of the very few successful battlefield commanders. Washington is taken by the British. They burned the White House, they burned the Capitol, they burned the Navy Yard. If it hadn't been for what I would consider a tropical storm, who knows where they would have wound up going, but that tropical storm stopped them. And then Fort McHenry survives, and that's about the only positive thing. But he was winning on the battlefield. He was defeating the Red Sticks. The Red Sticks were allies of the English in the War of 1812. Okay, Cherokee Warriors. You don't see any eagle dresses here. Headdresses, you don't see that? No. Cherokee Warriors, they believe sincerely in the sacred art of war. To advance yourself in Cherokee society, if you are a warrior, is either by being a great hunter who brought meat in to feed the tribe, to be a vicious stickball player. They call stickball the little brother of war. Let's see, there's two rules. Number one, you couldn't hit your opponent with your stick if you were holding it with two hands. And the other one, no substitutions. So you can imagine how vicious stickball could be. Now, they believed the other way to advance themselves was in warfare. So they believed very much in the sacred art of war. So these 600 Cherokees, who basically formed the cavalry for Andrew Jackson during his campaigns against the Red Sticks, saw this as a great opportunity to kill Creeks, to kill, maybe go with him to New Orleans and kill British. They went with him to fight the Seminoles. They could kill Seminoles. And they helped him run the Spanish off so they could get Florida. So what a deal if you're a Cherokee warrior. And this ethos that you see all across of Indian country. Go to a powwow today. They will honor all the veterans. This warrior ethos was very, very important to the Cherokees. Now, I always include this picture of dragging canoe. Now, if you were from Middle Tennessee or northern Alabama, you considered him a very vicious and pretty skilled war chief. However, the official version of the Eastern Band of Cherokees is that he was nothing but a troublemaker and a very minor war chief. Okay, one of the things I discovered in my travels around Indian country is all three of the federally recognized tribes have their version of Cherokee history. Okay, and oh, by the way, I think in this book, Dr. Abram actually says that he was a troublemaker and a minor war chief. But as you can see, you see Dragon Canoe and his warriors over there got the Kentucky long rifles. They learned very quickly that's the weapon of choice to use. Okay, the Ross and Ridge feud. Now, I'm going to, confession is good for the soul. When I was in Navy recruiting, they started this diversity program. Nobody wanted to go among the Indians. I said, well, I have a great-great-great-grandfather that went on the Trail of Tears. I'll go among the Indians. So the first three groups I visited was the CNO, the Eastern Band, and the United Kituah Band. I met Chad Smith, and we discovered we went to the University of Tennessee at the same time. We even ran in a 10K race, and it was after the 10K that I came up and we started talking and realized we were at UT Knoxville at the same time. He gets a full pre-law scholarship at Georgia, so he goes to Georgia and gets his degree, and then he goes to the University of Tulsa. He goes to law school. And oh, by the way, this feud still exists in Tahlequah, Oklahoma today. One of the things that helped me in Iraq and Afghanistan is indigenous people never forget a feud. The feuds go on forever.
5 minutes.
30 minutes?
25 minutes.
Oh, 25 minutes. Okay. Thank you. I'm trying not to go over a lot. Okay. Major Ridge, his treaty party signs the removal treaty. John Ross was the principal chief for 40 years, and he opposed it. He did everything he could think of to oppose it. They even won a Worcester versus Georgia Supreme Court case, in which the Supreme Court says the Cherokee Nation is a sovereign nation under the guidance and protection of the United States. Obviously, that was ignored. It didn't work. But John Ross was the adjutant for the 600 Cherokees in the Cherokee Regiment. So both these men had very good military experience, and they understood what the United States military could do to Indians. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So, you have the Ross faction versus the Ridge faction, which still exists today in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Okay, one of my favorites, Choctaw Chief Pushmataha. He commanded the 300 Choctaws who also fought very well for Andrew Jackson. As you can see, his official portrait, he's got an Army Brigadier General uniform on. Okay? He was pretty famous by the time the war against the Red Stick starts in the 1813 time period. Okay, he fought in the American Revolution. He was a scout for Mad Anthony Wayne. He fought in the Red Stick Wars, served very well for Andrew Jackson. And oh, by the way, 2 years ago, they put a monument up to him on the battlefield there in front of New Orleans. Okay? Because his 300 went with him, and they supported Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. Okay? So you can see these American Indians who served Jackson very well in his various military campaigns. Okay, who's this guy? I always do this to my students in Tennessee that I talk to. This was the commander of the Cherokee Regiment. Okay? And his name was, well, I goofed that up. Yeah. Brigadier General Coffee. Okay? Coffee County, Tennessee, named after him. Coffee County, Alabama, named after him. He is the guy who surveyed the boundaries that became the state of Alabama. So that's why he's so well known. And he's one of the few military officers who accurately described how useful the Cherokees were in the climactic battle with the Red Sticks.
And he came back to live here.
Pardon me?
He came back to live
in
here.
Yes.
To live in Lawrence.
He basically founded the town.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. So he was pretty well known. Now Victoria and I visited this battlefield twice. We did the 200th anniversary of this battle. We got to we didn't gourd dance. We stomp danced with the Creeks from Oklahoma, so it was pretty cool. We really enjoyed it. Now, I don't know whether this is working. No, it's not working too good. This is the climactic battle. This ends all of the alliances the Indians in the Southeast had with the British. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend, March 27th, 1814. If I can get over here, the Red Sticks built this incredibly stout wall right here at the base of the peninsula there. They zigzagged it. It's this way and this way and this way. So General Coffee is told, take your Cherokees and go around here. So you got Cherokees right here, okay? And you got Jackson and his army up on the hill. Well, Jackson orders the militia to advance. The field of fire is so intense, they have to retreat and come back. Then he opens up his artillery. The artillery balls bounce off this incredible wall that these Creeks had built. the Cherokees here are hearing all this gunfire, cannon fire, and so forth. So this Cherokee they call the whale, because he was a big guy, jumps in the water because he sees some canoes on the other side. He swims across under fire, gets a canoe, brings it back. The rest of the Cherokees say, okay, we see what's going on. They start, and oh, by the way, John Ross also was one of the guys who swam across. They got canoes. When they got enough canoes, then they launch an attack on the village, which is right here, which had elderly men and women. It was lightly defended, and children. So the Cherokees basically hand-to-hand combat. So they get to the village. They set a couple of buildings on fire. Jackson sees the smoke. Manawa, who is the war chief for the Creeks, the Red Sticks, sees it. So he starts sending warriors down to defend the village. Andrew Jackson sees that, and he orders the full frontal assault. The fight goes on all day long. 800 Creeks and their supporters are killed in this battle. More Indians are killed in this battle than any other battle between U.S. forces and American Indians. It immediately dissuades all the rest of the Indians from having anything to do with the British. It also leads eventually to the Treaty of Fort Jackson, the ceding of 23 million acres, which leads in December of 1819 to the establishment of the state of Alabama. So that's how important this victory was. Okay, Indian Removal Act, May the 28th, 1830. And what we have to remember, it's not just a Cherokee event. You've got the Cherokee, the Creeks, the Chickasaws, Choctaws, Seminoles, and other small tribes. Okay? The Shawnee are removed. The Miami are removed. The Sac and Fox are removed. And other small tribes are all removed from east to west of the Mississippi River. Okay. This was the philosophy behind the Indian Removal Act. Okay? To save the Indians, they must be moved outside of civilization. Okay? However, for the Cherokees, all the horrible things the Georgia militia was doing to them, when they found gold in Dahlonega in 1829, that was the kiss of death for the Cherokees. That was it. And they were fighting like crazy to do allotments and pull names out of the hats so they could get the gold. In fact, I started a little problem in Dahlonega one time. We went on a tour of this gold mine, and I said, man, they really did good with all this Cherokee gold they stole. That didn't go over. That didn't go over with, but it was the truth.
His nickname is Renegade.
Yeah, yeah, it was the truth. In Dahlonega, Georgia, yeah. Okay, now, what about the Seminoles? Okay, the 3 wars were fought against the Seminoles. Tough people. Jackson and the Cherokees fought a war with him 1817 to 1819, and there was another one, 1835 to 42, and 1855 to 58. So you can see the Cherokees didn't go, they weren't going to go easily. After each one of these wars, a small group would go to Oklahoma. However, 500 of them hid in the swamps, and they never signed a treaty. Okay, tough people. And I got a chance to visit with them on behalf of the Navy recruit. Incredible, incredible people. This guy is the most dynamic American Indian leader I ever met. Okay? This is Seminole Chief James Billy. He wrestled alligators as a teenager for tourists. He was a commando in the U.S. Army Special Forces in Vietnam. He even had his own rock band. Okay? So when he comes back, he gets elected chief, and he directed tremendous economic development for the Cherokees. They built casinos. They built businesses. He buys the Hard Rock Cafe franchise. So if you eat in a Hard Rock Cafe, you're supporting the Seminoles in South Florida. He bought the Miami Dolphins football stadium. That is now the Hard Rock football stadium. But the coolest thing I think he did, excuse my 1960s language, but anyway, the coolest thing he did was he made Florida State University pay him $50 million to remain the Florida State University Seminoles. So when you see that warrior come out on his painted pony and he throws the lance into the ground, that paid a lot of money so they could still do it. Okay, now, the northern route, which was 900 miles, the Cherokees were removed on, came through our hometown, McMinnville, Tennessee. Never mentioned, ever. At least 8 groups, maybe more, came through Warren County, Tennessee, and within a mile of McMinnville, and it was never mentioned. I asked history teachers before I graduated, after I graduated, even the last few, they never mentioned it. And in any book on the Trail of Tears, they're going to mention McMinnville, okay, as being on that northern route. The dotted line is the 900 miles to get to Indian Territory. And by the way, I might as well recommend this book, The Cherokee Trail of Tears, by several people. But anyway, this follows the detachments. So if you want to get a good idea of what happened to these 17 detachments, this is a very good book for that. I find it extremely helpful. Now, in Alabama, as you can see, there's different routes. There's at least 3 different land routes with a little modification, and then you got the water route. Now, I like this guy here. I'm a Navy logistics guy. Lieutenant Deese, Army Quartermaster, accompanied the Bell Detachment. Now, the reason the Bell Detachment comes through Fayetteville, Tennessee, and goes basically Highway 64 all the way to Memphis, is he had to make sure that the Bell Detachment, which was part of the treaty group, never intersected with any of the detachments that were supporters of John Ross, because they would immediately start shooting at each other. So he takes the southern route, which winds up about 700 miles, instead of the 900 miles, which was, and by the way, he wrote himself up a great commendation. And I saved to 200 miles. And oh, by the way, he's the only person who led a detachment, and nobody died. So I really think a lot of him. Unfortunately, during the Mexican-American War, he was moving supplies and material across the Rio Grande. He falls in the water and drowns, unfortunately. But I wanted to give you, the group that came through Fayetteville, Tennessee, they had 56 wagons, 318 horses, 660 people. They count for about a week on Adams Street. So you can see some of the detachments are twice that size. You can see how many horses and how many wagons you'd have to transmit those kinds of people to Indian Territory. Okay, removal of stockades. Let's talk about Alabama. Now, Mr. Larry Smith, that we met and got to be really good friends with, has written a lot of good information about Cherokees in Alabama. And he gave me this information. These are the stockades that were built to throw the Cherokees in Alabama. There's 8 of them. Fort Turkey Town, Gunner's Landing, Camp Morrow, Rawlingsville, Bellefonte, Fort Lovell, Fort Likings, Camp 8 Miles. You see they call them forts or camps. Now, per Dr. YoungWolf, about 5,000 Cherokees died in this removal effort. About 1,200 actually died on the trail. The rest died in these horrible camps they were thrown in. Very little sanitation, very little water, no really protection from the elements. And they would throw them in these camps till they could round them up in a larger group and move them on. Okay? So they died from cholera and all kinds of other diseases because they were thrown in these camps. And then the other large group that died was the young people and the older people. As soon as they got to Indian Territory, there was nothing there. So all they had was what they had on them in their wagons. So they had to start all over again. Okay, the Treaty Party versus the Ross Party. This is another unfortunate story. As soon as they get to Indian country, they start killing each other. Okay? It has been said that Major Ridge was shot 21 times before he ever got off his horse. Okay? So they start assassinating each other. You got the Treaty Party versus the Ross Party, which is very sad. And they basically had a civil war till 1845 until they said, let's quit killing each other. They have the Treaty of Reconciliation, and then they have a Renaissance. All this business acumen that these Cherokees learned. They raised wonderful cattle, wonderful horses. They knew how to grow cotton. They knew how to grow corn, and they were selling it on the market, and they were doing well. This went good till 1861, the Civil War, and they start killing each other again. Okay, very, very, very sad. Okay, The philosopher George Santayana, I use this a lot too, he made a statement that you've heard repeated many, many different ways. He said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Okay? Unfortunately,
40 minutes.
okay. All right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of lessons from history we totally ignore. And we just, it's amazing. In this book, The River Act Goes to Ayers Hall, I talk about a young man from Winchester, Tennessee, who takes the 2-year Navy enlistment to keep from getting drafted by the Army. Well, he winds up in Vietnam anyway. He's in the Mobile River Marine Force. He gets severely wounded. He survives. And he makes it to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville campus during the 1968 to 72 time frame, with all the campus confusion and being called a baby killer. So half the book's about Vietnam, and the other half is about what he did to try to get a degree at the University of Tennessee. Now, there's this other horrible event that takes place. It's called the Dawes Roll, which was passed in 1887. Okay? They take another 90 million acres from these 100 tribes that have been put in what would become Oklahoma. Okay? And it was another travesty, horrible travesty. Now, YoungWolf called me, Dr. YoungWolf called me late one night. He said, well, the 100th anniversary of the 1907 creation of the state of Oklahoma is not going to take place. And I said, why? And they said, because the Indians said, let's talk about what Angie Debo said and still the waters run. Okay? This will tell you why the Indians in Oklahoma don't trust anybody. This discusses horrible, disgusting things that were done to get the land, get the 93, I think it winds up 93 million acres. In fact, she has to leave Oklahoma to write the book because she was threatened. So this book tells you exactly why the Oklahoma Indians, they don't trust anybody. Okay? And it's a good one to read if you want to understand what was done in the Dawes Roll. So what you have is this gigantic real estate deal. Okay? You got 400 million acres. Anybody seen the movie Gone with the Wind? Okay, Gone with the Wind? Okay, all those 5,000 acres plantations in Georgia, over in West Tennessee, in Alabama, in Mississippi, came from this land confiscated from the Southeastern Indians. And what's interesting, if you look at the dates, you know, the Old South and Gone with the Wind and all that, it only lasted about 35 years. Because after the Indians are finally removed and they parcel all the land out, you have what's called the Civil War. And you have the Emancipation Proclamation. And as soon as that Emancipation Proclamation is spread and everybody knows what it is and what it's supposed to do, the plantation system ceases to exist. All out of probably the most fertile ground in the United States, maybe in North America, this land owned by these Southeastern Indians. Okay, so the Trail of Tears is a Indian removal event, which actually takes all the Southeastern tribes they call the five civilized tribes, removes them, and then all the Indians in the Ohio River area, and removes them as well. You have 100 tribes that wound up in Oklahoma. And my recruiting days allowed me to visit all three of the Cherokee tribes that are fairly recognized. Chief Jones was the chief of the Eastern Band. He was a great guy, retired Air Force guy. Chief Wycliffe, the United Kituah Band, was another very interesting personality. And then Chad Smith, and I got a chance to meet him a couple times. We went to the national celebration twice. And since I like to gourd dance, I got to gourd dance at the powwow. He introduces a family from Nashville. So when we were running, after he got through running in the race, I asked him, who were they? And he said, that's the family that adopted me and took me to Nashville, Tennessee, where he went to high school. And we finally realized we played football against each other, had no idea. So this is an event, and I'll kind of conclude with this. This was an event so horrendous that the Nazi war criminals used it as part of their defense in the Nuremberg trials. That's pretty sad, okay, and that's pretty horrendous. Okay, well, Wado, thank you very much for listening. I'll open up for questions. But yes.
One of the tenets of the Treaty of Jackson that was actually renamed a couple of times, I believe, provided that the Indians, if they adapted to the ways of the white man, they could remain in the state.
Okay, this is why what you described is why the Creeks, the Porch Band of Creeks, became federally recognized. They said we were on Jackson's side. We were the Creeks who wanted to negotiate, and you know there was a Creek Civil War going on, and so they said, per these, and this is another thing, it's kind of controversial, but David realized that Jackson didn't totally ignore these Indians. He gave many of them land grants, signed by him personally. That was one of the midnight calls I get from Dr. YoungWolf. He says, "Oh my God, I go to the Chieftains Museum in Rome and there's a blow-up of the removal order signed by President Martin Van Buren, not Andrew Jackson." He didn't tell them to take them out of their homes in the middle of the night. Also, behind the plexiglass were these copies of these land grants that he had made to these Indians who had fought for him. Okay, so he didn't, he adopted 3 Creek orphans. He took one to live with him, and his family members took the other 2. Lincoln lived to about 17 years of age till he died of tuberculosis at the Hermitage. He helped Sequoyah get paid for his salt mine that he didn't get paid for in the Treaty of 1817. He gave a letter of introduction to Bell and Stan Waddy to go and talk to Martin Van Buren about providing protection for the treaty party as they went west, because they knew once they intersected with the opposition, they'd start shooting each other. Okay, and that's a lesson I learned in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those tribes and the clans, they never forget the old feuds. Okay, and it's the same way in Indian country. It's not any different with American Indian tribes. The Crows still don't like the Sioux Indians. Okay, and so you can go on like that. So I got lucky. I'm not an expert, but I thank you for listening. Let me share some stuff with you that you probably had never heard before, and I hadn't. I never thought anything about the 600 Cherokee Regiment that helped make Jackson famous, and there was a book about it. He made me, Dr. YoungWolf made me read the removal of the Choctaws first, because they were removed in 1832, and they suffered horribly. The United States had no idea how to move an entire group of people 500 miles to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. But some of those creeks still had land grants. These creeks, some of the creeks fought on Jackson's side, and he gave them personal land grants. And so when they got federally recognized, they used the land grants in the treaty of Fort Jackson, and these caveats that were never honored to get federal acknowledgement. Okay, and unfortunately, there's 500 treaties between the United States and American Indians, and the United States broke every one of them.
Except one. They promised they'd take their land, and they took it.
They did. Yeah, they took that. Okay, all right. I'm sorry. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yes, and I know also the Indians that fled to Canada fared much better.
Yes.
Oh, they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Dr. YoungWolf helped the Cree Indians in Canada finally be recognized by the Canadian government. So he was. I think he helped the Pequots, and the Pequots were interested, and the Wampanoags, and then he was hired to do this research, and he's the one who called me and said, "Hey, Bill Clinton's got a Cherokee story too." Okay. We went to, David made a presentation to the assembled legislature in Arkansas, and he was talking about what it would be advantageous for them to honor the Indians. Okay, the Trail of Tears removal order is supposed to drop all the Indians off at eastern Arkansas, when the Army shows up and the scouts show up, there's all these Cherokees and Choctaws living in eastern Arkansas that had their own personal land grants from Andrew Jackson. So they had, okay, we can't do eastern, so that's why they had to go all the way around to the Fort Smith area, an area right next to Oklahoma. So this is original research that in a lot of times was inconvenient for, say, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma to deal with. The Eastern Band, anything that would make the CNO mad, they were fine. They didn't care. But and by the way, the Eastern Band will tell you they exist because of Andrew Jackson. The Porch Creek will tell you they exist because of Andrew Jackson, because they said that in their presentation down at Redstone Arsenal. So there's a Cherokee history and American Indian history is not a straight line. David's explained it this way, Dr. YoungWolf said, it's like geese. The geese go this way, they go that way, and they go that way, so their natural enemies will not know which way they're going. And by the way, every time they zigzag, they got a new leader. And that's kind of the way Cherokee history is, or American Indian history is. The Trail of Tears was a horrible example of what happens when greed and racism are guiding your principles. And I'll just say one more thing and then shut up. But there's an incredible lesson to learn from this, okay? An incredible lesson. And it's this, and I'll say this and be quiet. If you want to know the results of long-term, continuous, and illegal immigration, ask the Indians. They'll tell you how it ends up. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.